You're listening to Cultureful. I'm your host, Jess Lynn. This is part 2 of my 4-part conversation with Aisha Sarwari. In part 1, we explored her family roots, her mother's side moving from India to Kenya for business, where her mother was born, and her father moving from Pakistan to Uganda to teach. We talked about how the partition of India shaped both sides of her family, how her parents met, and the communities they came from. If you haven't heard it yet, I recommend starting there. In this episode, Aisha shares her experience growing up in Uganda after Idi Amin's 1972 expulsion of Asians, which ordered the country's South Asian community to leave. Her parents chose to stay, and she was born there in 1981. She reflects on her childhood and on navigating different cultures and communities in Uganda and during visits to Kenya. As always, you can watch the video version on YouTube. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back from the break. How are you feeling?
Amazing. I loved the duct tape as a metaphor.
Are you going to use that in one of your articles or books? Yes.
I have to tell you a funny story. So we were traveling in Pakistan International Airlines, which is the worst. And so the overhead cabin kept opening. And so I called the steward and was like, this keeps opening and we're about to take off. So she pulls out something from her pocket, which is duct tape. Yeah. And she just tapes it. And she looks at me and she goes back.
She's like, you're welcome. I fixed it. I have the duct tape right here. This is proof.
Fixes everything.
Yes. Okay, so where we left off was your parents got married in Kenya, and then they go to Uganda, where your dad was already living.
Mm-hmm. Kampala.
In the capital, in Kampala. Mm-hmm. And what kind of life did they create together?
For me, as the last born, I think all the bad stuff had already happened, you know?
So before that, what year did they get married?
Sadly, I don't remember. All I know is that my eldest brother, he is in his late 50s. So I'm thinking 60 years ago.
Okay, somewhere mid-1960s.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, your dad brings your mom back with him home.
Correct.
And they end up having how many kids?
They end up having 4 children that are alive and that stay alive.
So there were some other kids that didn't?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm the last born. 2 brothers, 1 sister. So my eldest brother is a doctor. My second brother is an engineer. And my sister is a teacher for autistic children.
Did your parents feel like it was... Did your mom feel like it was a jackpot to have an engineer and a doctor in the family? I don't know. I just hear a lot that like South Asians really love doctors and engineers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So my mom worked, like I said, I think that tradition from both my mom's side and my dad's side as migrants, that academic excellence part, they hit the jackpot with my eldest brother and my second brother. And my eldest brother is this serial award winner. Like whatever he does, he has to be at the top of it. And it comes so effortless to him. And he's so humble to make things worse, you know. He has like this, he's irritatingly perfect in the family, being like, I wish he had like a character flaw so we could hate him a little, but he's such a nice guy, you know, while being this massive award winner. And I asked him, I was like, you know, oh, you probably have this best teacher award on your wall. He's like, no, I took them all off. I mean, he told me this like last month and I'm like, why would you do that? He's like, because I didn't want to be determined or defined or individualized with the awards. And I was like, oh, there goes another award for humility, you know?
Seriously?
Yeah. And he is really at the top of his stuff. He's an infectious diseases doctor. He's been the chairman of a really large university hospital. He's top dog, and also superbly humble and has great character and humility. So it is really like
annoyingly perfect.
All the kids in the family hate him. We're like, oh, they're going to give him that example. But there are about 3 or 4 like him in the family. So this is how they are. They work really hard. They're humble. But I don't think anyone's more humble than him. He's very, very down to earth. And he's also an avid reader. So he has a lot of sense of philosophy and lived experience and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. So your parents, what kind of life did they create for themselves?
So like I said, because I was the last born, all the bad stuff had already happened. So I was born into this cute little cottage in Uganda, in Kampala, in a high school where my dad taught. He would come back home from work at about 2, to walk through a garden that my mom made. My mom, again, whatever she touches blooms. She's great at gardening. So even in Uganda, where no one needs to plant these beautiful dahlias, she would, there would be every color on the color wheel around this cottage. Of course, we were very, I wouldn't say poor, but we were very, it was a humble environment. And so, old tins of oil were used as flower pots, and she was always in the earth. So she's a very grounded woman, again, would wash her own clothes. There's somewhere in the book where I've talked about how I've always, all my life, seen her bring her, duct taped glasses from the bridge of her nose to the top all the time, because it always kept falling when she was washing dishes or, putting the clothes on the clothesline. So, yeah, my dad would walk through that beautiful garden, come home, and get treated like a king, like given food, put to bed
with reading.
With an audio podcast, the original audio podcast, and then
live private audio podcast.
And then also, like, you can't turn it off against his will. Like, so she'd be like, "You're snoring. Why are you making me keep reading?" And he's like, "No, I'm listening."
Hey, no, I'm
and then
awake.
she'd quiz him. She's like, "Oh, what happened with this character?" And fantastically, he would just repeat exactly what happened. So she would get surprised and be like, "Okay, I guess I'll keep reading."
Oh my gosh. Okay.
They had after I think 35 years of living in Uganda, I caught the tail end of all the bad stuff being worked out. The war, whatever interpersonal challenges they had. And of course they had interpersonal challenges, because he was a man of a lot of temperamental challenges. He'd seen a war, and he'd migrated. So he was rough around the edges, as most men of his generation were. So by the time I was born, he was just the perfect dad, grading papers all day, all night, reading, the president of the Pakistan Society in Uganda, made me recite a lot of long poems, loved me to death, was very gentle. Everywhere he went, I got to go on his motorbike, got to sit in the front and ride. It was, I guess the reason I hark back to his days is because I think that was the only time I experienced patriarchy working for a woman.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, with your dad protecting you.
Uh-huh. Okay. The protection.
Patriarchy works when the men actually are responsible, are family oriented, are capable, are resourceful, and are alive. So I got that. I got the nice part of patriarchy.
When you were growing up, when you were a little kid. So how much was religion in the family when you were growing up?
My mom didn't need to do what the Kokni Muslims did. There was not that kind of, fear-oriented religion. I think when she married my dad was what you would call, in a simple way, a very progressive liberal Muslim. He really didn't care too much about ritual. He actually thought that the whole point of ritual was futile. What mattered is how you conducted yourself in your day-to-day, how you contributed to society, to community. And it kind of, I think, freed my mom a lot from the good girl phenomena. And I don't think she passed it on to me and my sister. So we were really free to be whoever we wanted within, like, it wasn't like, oh, you're a good girl now, you're a bad girl now. That only happened in Kenya.
For her, when she was growing up.
And for us as well, when we would visit. But back home, we didn't have to do any of it, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we were duplicitous in that way, because when we'd go back to her family, we'd have to pretend, And also, she didn't have time to do all this stuff. Like, she was literally washing, cleaning, scrubbing, raising kids all the time. Like, you want her to now be the imam, she would just be good. And she herself would practice. She was a very, very practicing Muslim. So she would pray, she would, and she'd be kind. And so that kind of thing. So we just saw that part of it. And we were like, yeah, we don't need to do much else, but, and fast. And of course, those basic tenets were always there, but it was never shoved down our throat. If we wanted to do it, we would do it. So I would be a kid and I would pray with her if I wanted to, but if I didn't, I would just jump on her back,
And play because you're a kid, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't this, oh, it's so sacred, you can't, let kids mess with it. It wasn't, like I said, fear oriented. It was love oriented.
Would you consider your dad at that time, was he culturally Muslim, but not necessarily religiously Muslim?
Correct. Culturally Muslim. I think after he got sick and was diagnosed with cancer, then he did, like all old men, facing mortality, would get a bit more emotional about, the life of the Prophet and, the cultural part. But he was never, for example, when he'd go to Kenya and they would make him lead prayers for his in-laws, he read the shortest prayers, made multiple mistakes, and wrapped everything up really quickly.
Because he didn't want to expose himself too much for not being into it.
No, and he had a lot of confidence. So he was just like, I know what I'm doing, because he was well read. So he knew, the religious contexts of things in a much more intellectual way as well. So he didn't think that this was very necessary. But the joke is that he would read the shortest chapters during prayer and omit some and then be done with it and be like, okay, where's the food?
And in terms of gender roles in the household that your parents created, it sounds like they definitely had gender roles where, your dad was working and then your mom was doing the household, taking care of the kids. But also that some of these gender role expectations for her kids, how she was raising your brothers and you and your sister seemed very different from what she grew up with. So can you talk a little bit more about what do you think were any gender expectations for you and your siblings?
Maybe because I didn't hit puberty while we were in Uganda, I didn't feel anything that she put down my sister or me. So, we as South Asians, we have this thing called a dupatta, which is, we don't take the hijab, but what we do is we do have a scarf that you do want to wrap yourself around, just from, just a bit of a, let's say formal decency kind of thing. And it's part of the culture. Usually our dupattas or our scarves are extremely beautiful. So you do want to wear them. So that she would insist on for me and my sister when we were growing up. But other than that, it was like, she stitched her own clothes. So she stitched our clothes. So we never went to buy anything. We always wore what she stitched on her Singer machine. So she was extremely versatile and creative and actually really beautiful clothes now that I look back at it. Very lacy, very beautiful buttons. So like I said, whatever she touched was beautiful. So she'd make us these clothes and the dupattas were part of it. But besides that, it wasn't this, oh, you don't look decent or you do, there was no slut shimmy part of it. However, she transformed completely when she went back to her family of origin. And, the slut shaming part was very, very obvious that she didn't know what to do with it because she was living in two worlds. So she had to show her family that she was a strict mom. And so she kind of, I don't blame her for this now, but she would admonish us for not being good enough girls.
In front of her side?
Yeah.
Would she explain it later? Oh, I'm just doing this. So then they...
She would say, look, I know you're my children, you'll understand. But children don't understand. They think it's their fault and they think, so I get it now, many years later, after studying feminism and studying how women have internalized misogyny and how that's a survival skill. But I did not like her for doing that. And I think it just created a lot of confusion because then I just ended up liking my dad more because he would not be hypocritical,
He wouldn't...
Code switch.
Yeah. He wasn't changing his parenting style wherever he was with you.
But he was a man, so he could.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Women can get away with being who they are. My mom couldn't say, this is how I've raised my children. I want to raise them this way and this is how I want it. This balance between the world and, what we call deen and dunya, so like religion and real life. She couldn't stand up for that and say it. She was ashamed of how we were turning out in Kenya, but then in Uganda, we were fine. We had to go back to being ourselves.
Let's take a short break. Okay, I want to ask about, and I know this is before you were born, in 19 1971 when Idi Amin came to power in Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
And the expulsion of Asians happened. And basically, it was targeting this South Asian minority and ordering the South Asian minority in Uganda to leave within 90 days. It was actually 1972 when Ugandan dictator Idi Amin ordered about 60,000 people of South Asian descent, including many Ugandan citizens, to leave the country. This uprooted families and businesses, forcing people to start over in places like the UK, Canada, India, and the US. Many had little warning and faced the huge challenge of rebuilding their lives from scratch in unfamiliar places. For Uganda, losing this key business community caused shortages, rising prices, and job losses, while also deepening ethnic mistrust and tearing apart the country's diverse communities. Well, I know you were born in Uganda, so your parents chose not to leave. So they were there during that whole period. Yeah, tell me about that. What happened? What do you know?
So my dad somehow, now I can guess it's because of the fear of migration, wanted to stay put. And he also felt that it's not such a big deal. Wars come and go. If you stay put, you have a better chance of survival. So I think he put his family at risk inadvertently because he just overemphasized safety of staying versus safety of fleeing. Because he had fled before and it didn't turn out well. So I think he was trying out something new. But it was a really bad idea because my family and Idi Amin, for those of you who don't know it, and you can watch this movie called The Last King of Scotland, in which they explain his psychosis and how he was an extremely terrible tyrant and dictator. You know, what he did to his wife was unbelievably brutal. So he started off being the friends of the merchant class, the Indians and the Pakistanis and the brown people, or the South Asians, as he would call it, or the Asians, he would just classify them as Asians. And then he started saying, oh, you know what? Africa is for Africans. What the hell are you guys doing here? When the economy went bad. So he said, okay, that's our wealth that you made on our backs, and you guys are racist, which I must add, some Asians were. They were really terrible to Africans and Ugandans, and they would treat them disrespectfully. So he tapped into that sense of deprivation that Africans had, that these people have come into our country. They're not even from here. They're rich. They, hire us as servants. They don't let us eat in the same utensils. So like they were done. So he really resonated with that class. And because there was a lot of militia class, there was a decree to shoot anyone who's in Asian at sight. So he not only made political sense, he also provided military power to anyone to exercise anything. So my family really did see a lot of carnage, a lot of loss, and a lot of fear. And my mom, I don't know if she went along with my dad's decision, but obviously she had to, so my dad refused to move. But my dad also felt like, look, I'm a teacher. I'm not rich. I have given my entire life to this community as a teacher. So why would I be targeted? Plus, I'm in a high school campus and people will protect me. So I think he was right on that count, that he didn't do anything wrong. He should not be the one targeted. But he also forgot how much things change when there's a riot and when there's military power. Mm-hmm. So yes, there have been multiple incidents. One actually happened when I was very young, because even though Idi Amin left, Obote came in, there was a very similar sentiment. It's kind of like the Afghan war in Pakistan. Like you start telling people that so-and-so is an enemy, and then the war ends and you're like, okay, don't mind what we said. Just go on being friends. And it doesn't work that way. It takes a few generations to get that person to stop being an enemy. So similarly, the militia, this was Yoweri Museveni, who's, by the way, still in power. Can you believe it? I'm 43 right now, and he's been in power since I was there. The guy's just not leaving.
Idi Amin was overthrown in 1979 by Tanzanian forces and Ugandan exiles. After several years of unstable governments, Yoweri Museveni became president in 1986 following a guerrilla war. He has remained in power ever since.
So it was his rebellion that, started fighting with the Obote regime, and they would just enter Asians' houses and shoot them. So my dad decided to stay, and there was this incident where militiamen, often like just teenagers with big guns they can't even hold, asked my mom to open the door. And we lived in this perennial fear of the knock. So if there was a knock, you had to open. You just had to, okay, because it would get worse if you didn't. So she opened. I was sleeping in another room. I was, I think, maybe 3, somewhere around there. And they came into the room. And of course, I was afraid that and we called them the army men, that the army men would come in. So when they came in, I ended up being blocked between a corridor where I came out of my room with my blankie, which I called Kiki, and my mom was on the other side of the army men. And so I was walking towards her, but then I froze in my tracks because they were there with the guns. And I started apparently screaming really hard because I was petrified. And my mom, calmly told them that, the child's afraid. We're giving you everything you want. Can you let her come to me? Because she's, very petrified. Just let her come to me. Mm-hmm. And I think they were teenagers with big guns, and they also got a bit scared because apparently I was screaming really loudly and continuously. So they dug in and said, no, she's not going to go to you. And then that made me frightened, and that made my mom more scared. And she then started yelling at them to listen to her and bring the child to her. She's like, look, do whatever you want. Let the child come here. Like, why are you just standing there blocking her? And I think in that confusion, my mom at some point, he really yelled at them. And then they just kind of clocked their gun, and instead of shooting at her, they shot at her foot. Maybe there was like something that they didn't know how to shoot well. Instead of shooting at her foot, it went, and the bullets went right next to her foot. And there was this, and we had a cement house. So the cement sharpeners were everywhere. And I remember this like deathly silence. Of course, I stopped crying, Mm-hmm. My brothers were outside helping this other woman whose car was stuck with a kid. So when they heard the gunshots, they had their own neighborhood watch that they collected to overpower these guys. I know this sounds like very whatever, but it was just how you lived back then. You had to be prepared. And my dad had money that he had kept for days like these. So he then gave it to them and said, you want to take anything? Take anything. My uncle from Kenya was on the phone, from what I understand, because he was listening to, he was like, stay on the phone. So they yanked the phone, they turned some tables around, they took the money. On their way out, I think my brothers and their neighborhood watch overpowered these guys, and they managed to contain the situation. But if something like this happens to you when you're afraid it's going to happen to you for so many years, it leaves something in you that you either don't want to ever talk about, or you want to be defined by it.
Which way did it go for your parents?
My mom, because she believes in the power of stories. She's the one that's told me these stories. Of course, I didn't have much of a memory of it except for the terror. But I haven't heard my dad talk about it. Again, of course, he passed on when I was also very little. But I don't understand why anyone would stay in a place that is such direct danger to your skin color or to who you are, and then think, nah, it'll be okay. Mm-hmm. To have that much wishful thinking, again, is such a fear-based, trauma-based response.
I wonder, like for your dad, because he had already gone through something so gut-wrenchingly difficult and dangerous. Maybe he was just like, well, but maybe this different approach. Yeah, in hindsight's 2020, but like at that point, he was just like, well, what could be worse? But yeah, this staying could be worse.
Staying could be worse. Yeah. And you don't know until you go through it. But also, like, it's hard to leave home, right? I mean, I can imagine he walks through those dahlias that my mom planted and the roses that my mom planted over years and years and years, where all his kids have grown up and become educated. And now, what is he supposed to do? Pick up everything and leave? So our house was the place where all the Pakistanis and Indians left their important stuff in. So we were like a garage for them, because everybody left on a plane when they were asked to. And they were like, okay, Mr. Sarwari is not leaving, so let's leave our stuff there, hoping that they would come back someday, Mm-hmm. Of course, that never happened. But I remember that he was the fort for a lot of the community to be like, okay, you know what? He's brought us together. He'll bring us together again. We'll go for a bit. We'll come back. But the instability lasted for a very long time.
And that high school community, did they protect him the way he thought they would?
I don't think there's anyone left with power. These are teachers. That's the thing with the banality of evil, right? Everyone sort of, it's all banal. It's like everyone's like doing normal human stuff. They don't have the power to go take up arms, or say, no, this is wrong or this is right. They're just living. And that's how silence is also an act of war in so many ways, that not doing anything can be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So these were just very peaceful people, and that's unfortunately what happens to non-fighting tribes, is that they just get swiped up. But nobody, like those militia boys were from the community, of course. As sad as that is, yeah.
It sounds like that the neighbors and the colleagues like weren't turning your family in, but also maybe didn't have, like, they weren't necessarily like taking up arms to protect you or that kind of thing because of their own fear for their safety.
Yeah.
At that time, were all of you Ugandan citizens?
So my dad had a Pakistani passport, which he retained, and he was an expat. My mom had a Kenyan passport. So we were always Pakistani because of our dad's passport. So we always had a Pakistani passport. It's been very, very precious to me, simply because it's sort of like my connection to my dad. So there was an opportunity after he passed where I was living with my mom's side of the family in Kenya, where they were like, listen, Pakistani passports are the worst in the world, which they are. They really are. Nobody gives them visas. It's considered to be actually the worst passport in the world, maybe next to Afghanistan.
Citizens from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Pakistan face some of the strictest international travel restrictions, with passports that allow visa-free access to fewer than 40 countries. In contrast, citizens from countries like Japan, Singapore, Germany, and South Korea can travel visa-free to over 190 countries.
And I said, no, I want to keep it. I want to keep my Pakistani passport for as long as possible. So yeah, we were Pakistani passport holders, but Ugandan in every sense of the word, because, my mom and dad made Uganda their home. So it was like their own little world. And they had such lovely friends. They had such lovely traditions. It was almost like a little bit of an India and Pakistan and a Bangladesh there. And what was beautiful about Uganda was later on, my dad became a professor at the Islamic University in Uganda in a very rural area called Mbale. And it really blurred out the boundaries of nationality. So if you were from the area, if you were Sri Lankan or Bangladeshi or Indian or whatever, being in Uganda in a remote place made you just club together. So you were preserving then the identity of a region rather than a nation,
Mm-hmm.
So it just grew. And so all their friends were from different places in the world, different parts in the world, but they were a bit closer to the Asian community, which is interesting. Think about the Indian Muslims holding on to their very, very own tight corners. And then in times of war, you just expand those corners a little more.
But they also had friends that were Ugandan?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Because they interacted in those circles and their fellow teachers so there were very few Asians just to create that. We're looking at a 2% population. Yeah.
Especially after 71.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of your earliest memories besides that? I know, like, the memory of the guys coming in, when you were with your blanket, that was something that you were told after, right? What were some of your own earliest memories that you think you actually, you can remember?
I was not considered to be very pretty in Uganda because, when an Asian goes in to Uganda, and specifically a rural town, my classmates were, the school that I went to was very impoverished. And I was the only Asian. There was one Asian boy with me. He was my best friend. His name is Toto. But you had 200 people in a class or 100 people in a class. often, studying under a tree, and you were the only brown person there. So you were like really a freak. They would come touch my hair, and I'd be like, oh my God, ugh, like look at her hair, it's straight, or and not springy, and what can we do to make her better or prettier? And look at her nose, and she's got such a long nose, and it's not flat, and how ugly is that?
Even with like friends, like your friends would come and
yeah. I mean, I don't know about friendship, because I think it was a very long journey to friendship. I did have a friend, her name was Diana, and she was kind to me, but I don't think it was friendship. She was just kind to me. So that's what happened in majority groups, right? I mean, we have this very Eurocentric version of what pretty is, but they abhorred my color. They were so sad for me for being light-skinned. They were so sad for me for having the nose that I did. So I used to go to sleep taping my nose with a gauze to make it flatter,
Because you were trying to reach the Ugandan standard of beauty, which was a flatter nose.
Yes. Wow. I liked my tan more. I also felt very ashamed of having wealth, because even though we were poor, for rural Uganda, we were not. So I would go to school, take off my shoes, wear my slippers, because everyone came to school in slippers. It was hard for me to fit in from Kampala to Bale, because I lost the friends that I had in the community that were Asian. So
how old were you when you moved?
I think about 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you had more Asians around you in Kampala and more friends.
And Bali was, because it was rural, it was very isolated. You couldn't really, and remember, this is not an internet era or something you can see the rest of the world. I was the newest thing that had come in from another world, and
very exotic.
Yeah, and I remember one of the earliest memories you asked. So I was singing a Ugandan song in a Ugandan way, that kind of thing, with the drums for a parents teachers meeting. And then I realized that I'm being laughed at, that they're like, oh, check her out, she thinks she's Ugandan, right?
Yeah.
Kids can be mean, but it's also now in retrospect really funny. I can see myself from their eyes trying to be Ugandan, because I was, right?
Yeah.
What else am I?
Because you grew up, you were born there, you grew up there, you went to school.
Like I know the language.
Yeah, because you grew up going to school in Lugandan, right?
Yeah, no, it was English. That's the thing with Africa, is like English is everywhere. Luganda is a second language of course, for people like us, first for them, but everybody knows English, and everybody knows really good English, maybe with a bit of a challenge with punctuation, grammar, but they know their literature, they read well.
In Uganda, English is the official language in government, schools, and business, especially in urban centers like Kampala, while rural communities more often use local languages in cultural and daily life. Across other former British colonies in Africa, such as Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, and South Africa, English likewise serves as the common language for formal settings, with local languages remaining more common at home and within communities.
These places are extremely progressive. And I say progressive because you can tell how progressive a place is based on how they respect their teachers. So we could never shake the hand of our teacher without kneeling down. So a teacher was everything. You had to respect them. So obviously, talking about my own experience in terms of the downside of being in Uganda for me at that time was the normalization of corporal punishment. A lot of corporal punishment, and very normalized corporal punishment. Like they would just like spare the rod, spoil the child thing. It was also very culturally appropriate to do that. Disciplining children with a cane was ideal. It wasn't something you did sometimes. It was something you did to make the child better. So the only reason I say the downside is because corporal punishment is difficult for a child, no matter what. No matter what. And I'm pretty sure the Ugandan culture now has rebelled against it, and it's not okay anymore. And I also feel like there's a colonial reason for that happening, because you have an oppressive ruler. They control the native populations through violence. So then it just gets passed on. So obviously there are many reasons for that. But getting into a class, if a teacher had a bad mood, they would just tell you to lie down on the grass field, And before that, they would send a committee of kids to go select a cane. And actually, Trevor Noah talks about this quite a lot. It's not just East Africa, it's also in South Africa, where you would go to select the cane with which you'd get beat up. And so the committee that got to select the cane from the bushes, had like to decide, do you want the flexible whip or do you want the hard bamboo? The committee would argue for hours being like, no, this hurts more. This cuts more. No, this is more painful for the bones.
They would
or whatever.
debate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it was so normal. I got to be on a committee once and I went for the whip because the bamboo was actually very painful. With the whip thingy, the audio of it was really terrible, but you just get a basic cut and it wouldn't hurt anything around it. So anyway, we'd all lie down. And then there was also a debate in corporal punishment of which was worse psychologically. Do you get to be on the first part of the line? And they would always hit you on the butt, right?
Is the teacher going to be most enthusiastic in the beginning or at the end?
At the end, yeah. And also
more tired at the end.
Precisely. Thanks for bringing that out. So the consensus was that they would be tired at the end. However, anticipation anxiety is such a terrible thing. So by the time that they came to you and they were tired, it wasn't a guarantee that they would be tired, but it was also like you would be done because you would have heard everyone scream and cry and try and run and try. And there was always this one child that was like, it stops with me. You're not going to hit me today. And they would like fight the teacher or hold the cane. Yeah, stand up to the teacher. And you're just down on the ground being like, oh, I have 24 more to go. And this guy is creating a ruckus, like just be done with it. Just be done with it.
Wow.
But we were in it together. So it would unfortunately create this sense of community.
Shared trauma is really...
Trauma bonding, yeah.
It's trauma bonding, yeah.
And there was this guy in Damascus who was a repeat kid. Like he was the tallest in our class. He was probably got 100 years old. He just never graduated from that class. And he was the biggest and the strongest. And he was so done with the beating. So he would just always stand up to the teacher being like, why are you doing this? I've done this years and years. I'm like, just leave it. Not me. Move on. And the teacher would be like, no, you're part of the class. You get it as well. And he would fight. And if you were in the middle somewhere, Damascus would always mess it up for the rest of us. So you had to kind of not be anywhere after him. Right?
Okay, this is one of your early memories. So very vivid. This is so vivid.
Very unforgettable.
Yeah. And you said friendship took some time. Like, what's your earliest memory of like a solid friendship?
So Diana would be this really smart girl in my class. And obviously there was a bit of a charm to have your token Asian friend as well. So I think that's where she picked me, She was like, yeah, fine, come along, And she was very determined and very strong-headed and very beautiful. And I think that she was also looked down on because she was brown-skinned. And in Uganda, you didn't like brown skin because it felt like you had mixed race origins because you had collaborated with the white people or something had happened in your past where you had that blood. And so I think she probably felt pityful towards me because she was also, I think the word for it was, like the slur for it was bogoya, which meant that you looked like a banana, which is a less black color, right? So mixed or half caste. So she was already sort of in the edges of society's approval. So I think that's why she felt, a kinship towards me, and she'd take me home and we'd have porridge at her house and we'd make lemonade at her house. So there was that sense of belonging. But then her mom would always make us wash the dishes or do the chores as well to be like, oh, you've had my lemonade, you better pay up, right? So it felt like a bit of a community. And I think I really wanted her to be my friend when I was younger. And early friendships, there's always a power dynamic. So she was a bit of a bully where if I didn't do what she said, it was a problem, And I was
bully with you.
Yeah. So for example, she'd say, take my homework notes, do them this way. And then she'd also be like, okay, this is my handwriting. You learn it so that the teachers can't tell. So I went through a course of penmanship trying to understand it.
Oh my gosh. But you were willing to do it because you were like, well, she's my friend. Or like, what was
I think I was part of her posse. One thing I knew was that she wasn't my friend, but she was part of my posse. What's really strange is when my sister got married in Bali, in a small hotel there, and Diana was my only friend, so I invited her to come to this reception. My cousins made fun of her for being my friend, for being Black, being like, oh my God, check out Aisha's friend. And that was such a weird moment for me because I was like, back in school, I am the person who's laughed at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the moment you bring this one person into my community, she's the freak.
Like the othering happened the other way and you're like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this before.
Yeah.
Because you were so used to being the one that was the other. Wow.
Diana right now, from what I understand, is a major minister, which doesn't surprise me. There are two ministers from my class, by the way. One of them is the spokesperson of Yoweri Museveni and the other person is Diana. So these were extraordinarily smart kids. God knows how they made it from a school like that, But that's what I'm saying. You can't really stereotype any of these places because they have brilliance embedded within the cultures that we might look down on.
We should just not look down on them.
We should just not look down on them. Yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
Last question for this part of your life. So little Aisha in Uganda, in the capital, in this, rural area after that, what was little Aisha's identity at that time? Was it Asian Ugandan, Pakistani Ugandan? How did you think of your identity when you were a kid?
I don't think I thought about it. I think it was just so easy for me to flow between different places, notwithstanding these weird moments where I got laughed at because I didn't belong. But outside of that, I did the whole song and dance and drums and immersive experiences in all cultures. So back in Uganda, I was very Pakistani because that's what the speeches and the commemorations were all about, very Muslim. In rural Uganda, I was very immersed in rural Uganda, stories about witch doctors and, Africa has a very rich tradition of ancestor stories. So lots of storytelling around that, lots of great music. I also grew up in a very green area. So Bali was very, very fertile. If at night my mom would throw something that has water from the kitchen, some residue, the next day there would be something sprouting out of it. The soil was black in color. It was loam soil. It was volcanic soil. It was the best. So I grew up in a place where they had so many waterfalls and so many mountains, and you just wander because it was a small community. The kids would just come for dinner and that's it. You didn't know where they were on the weekends, and they just went to school and they came back, So I had a very open spirited communion with nature, with friends, with community that, let's go do this. Oh, how about we go see the waterfall today? That's a 4-hour walk. Don't need to tell anyone where you are. In Uganda, there was these things called boda boda, which is border to border. There were these bicycle men. They would just put you in the back of the bicycle and you'd ride from place A to place B. Very free, very like childhood should be. My kids, conversely, are on a device all the time, and I feel like I really lucked out for being in a place that was safe enough for children to just do whatever they wanted and come back home by dinner.
Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Part 3 drops in 2 Tuesdays. Be sure to subscribe or follow and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. In Part 3, we hear about Aisha losing her dad and then moving to Kenya with her mom. She takes us on her journey through adolescence and young adulthood, meeting her husband and her search of home. You'll find links to connect with Aisha and her work in the description. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend. Word of mouth really helps us grow. You can also support this independent podcast and help keep these stories of representation coming by donating at the link in the description. This episode was produced and edited by me, with advising and executive production support from Ruben Yana Ruben. I'm Jess Lynn. See you soon.